So when I came out, it was difficult for me personally. I got nothing but support from the geospatial community. And my career has flourished since then in a way I didn't expect.
Welcome, everyone, to a new episode of Looking Up with UP42. Our guest today is Todd Barr, Director of Product at Verisk. Hi, Todd. Pleasure to meet you, and thank you very much for taking the time to talk with us today.
My pleasure, Virginia.
Being that it's really early where you are.
It's never early for me.
Todd, as you know, I was doing a little bit of research, and I've seen that you've been involved in geospatial for more than 20 years.
Yes.
You are driving the adoption for geospatial products, but you also mentor future generations. I've seen several posts in which you have like open hours or like ask me everything. And you're also an advocate for diversity in the workplace and in leadership. And I imagine that there were many experiences and breaking points in your life that brought you where you are today and made you the person that you are today. And that is what we would love to talk about in this episode, about those experiences and learn how we can all do a better job in terms of diversity and inclusion.
Okay. Yeah, I'm an open book, so let's go ahead and dive in.
Okay. And I would like to know, when did your love for geospatial start, and when did you realize that you wanted to share this passion with the new generations?
So my background is actually in economics. I was working at an international nonprofit in DC in the late 90s. And at that time, I was young. And I was the computer person in our department, right? I understood how to like make Excel macros was my shtick, really, more than anything else. And then, a couple years went by, and then after 9/11, I got sucked into the whole defense intelligence, homeland security apparatus. And that's when I really started to see the power of geospatial and how the analytics and stuff how you do spatial analytics and make the results more consumable by people because they can understand it's on a map, it's on a spreadsheet, they can visualize it, right? And then I became a big advocate for at that point for geospatial technology across the board. So I changed up my career and did some fun employment. That's where I really started doing more outreach for geospatial into the community. And then I've been working in private sector since then. I currently work to support the insurance industry with catastrophic modeling. But as far as like my diversity, inclusion, and belonging aspect goes, so it's always a known secret in my friends group that I was different, right? No, and I didn't really know how to define it. And it took me a long time to go on this journey to define who I was. But I knew as a member of the LGBTQ plus community, I was never open about it. I knew my gender was kind of all over the place as it was. I couldn't define it. I was never able to define it until I started learning about the various flavors of non-binary genders, right? And then in 2019, I had a lot of personal loss in 2019.
I read about it.
Yeah, and after my friend died, I was like, I have to. I've been going through therapy for EMDR for PTSD beforehand, so my defense mechanisms were gone, right? My psychological defense mechanisms are just not there. And I could no longer push myself forward or be the best person I could be if I wasn't honest with the world about who I was. So
and yourself.
Yeah, and myself. So I came out of all places on LinkedIn because everybody else pretty much knew. When I came out, I looked at this, for lack of a better term, big bag of privilege I had as someone who presented as white male, right? And I was like, okay, what can I do with this? So I decided at that point that no one's journey should be as difficult as mine. If I can stop it, if I can help it, if I can help them along. So I became very vocal about it. And then once I moved over to Verisk, I became the director of Verisk Pride Boston, our internal DEI, our employee network groups. And I still advocate with young geographers and young people in the geospatial community, women, non-binary folks, any LGBTQ plus, anyone
Underrepresented groups.
Yeah, the people who are marginalized, right? The people the people who need more help. I mean, my background is my parents weren't rich. I came from a very poor background, and I kind of built myself up. But in hindsight, so during lockdown, when we were all in our houses because of COVID, I did a long look at my life, and I call it deconstructing my masculinity. It's like, why did I make these decisions? Why did I do this? Why did I do that?
How does that work, actually? How do you do that? Yeah.
So when you go through a deconstruction process, you kind of take your experiences, right? What I did was I wrote them all out, and I basically reframed it, looking at it from a different perspective. Not someone who deserved these things, but as someone who was existing, like someone who was involved. It was someone who's existing in that world, right? But I'm looking at it through a different lens. I'm looking at it through the lens of someone who is marginalized. Did I get these advantages because I was a white male, or because I was capable? I was masking heavily for easily over 20 years. So I needed to really understand how I could drop those masks and become the person who I was, and merge that with my professional persona. And I think I've done that.
I just I have a question about like what you were just saying, and taking in consideration what you were saying, right? Like the privileges of being like a white male in an industry that it's like heavily white male dominated.
Yes.
Did you feel that like the need for this mask was even heavier in the geospatial industry?
If you add, and so put on top of that the fact I was working in defense, which is so yeah, it was a heavy weight.
I see.
There were times when I just mentally just broke down about it, right? And it wasn't like a standard sort of like like being a puddle in bed. I would go out and like just numb myself, right? Go out drinking, go out doing something else, just so I could get past this, so I could continue being that person who I wasn't.
To be able to put the mask for the other people. I see.
So I could function in this environment and kind of keep pushing forward, but because doing this mission I loved, but because of the person I am, I would have been ostracized, not promoted, or just pushed out.
You know, when I was preparing for our conversation, I wanted to understand. I mean, there's like maybe not a lot of specific numbers about diversity and geospatial, but I also thought about like, okay, how are we doing in Germany about that? And something like really interesting that I read was that like only 1/3 of LGBTQ plus employees talk openly about their identity with other co-workers, and 1/3 actually fear consequences if they are talking about their identity at work. They fear about consequences with customers, or as you mentioned, right, in terms of like promotions and so on. So what was the experience for you once that actually you made it public in 2019 that you were non-binary? Like, what was like the impact and the effect that?
Negligible. But I'm coming at it from a serious place of privilege, right? Because I had established myself for 20 years as a professional. Everyone knew me as someone who, as the person who got things done. I understand this, I understand that. So when I came out, it wasn't necessarily, it was difficult for me personally, but from an employment perspective, it was okay, right? I got nothing but support from the geospatial community, right? I'm sure some people, nothing was overtly said bad against me at that time. And my career has flourished since then in a way I didn't expect.
Okay. In which way?
being able to bring my full self to my work, being able not to spend, let's say, 20% of my energy on just masking and keeping things contained, and also being more functional as a person and not feeling threatened all the time. I feel I'm doing more for thought leadership. I'm doing more with with mentorship and that kind of stuff. But I feel that since I'm actually my full self now, I feel for the first time in the last 4 years, I feel like a complete, or in the last X amount of years, I feel like a complete person. And I'm bringing that as much as I can to my leadership, right? To the people who report to me and the people above me. I try to be, I'm emotionally available. I understand the whole person opposed to just their professional persona, or who they, or their personal persona. I understand that all that's fused together as a person. And if you're marginalized, if you're a marginalized person, you don't feel like you can do that. And there's a certain aspect of imposter syndrome and other stuff. Mm-hmm. And that's why I'm very supportive of the marginalized people in my office. I try to make sure I say I always bring someone with me. If I get a promotion or something happens with me, I make sure that someone who's marginalized comes with me, or I try to at least, right? Or push for them to go to a conference instead of me. I could go, I could go to one of our international conferences and talk for 20 minutes, and it'd be another presentation, right? I have a long list of times I've presented at conferences, but if I send someone who's just like, let's say a woman who's like in her early 30s, whose career is just really starting to blossom, and send her, that could give her a major boost, right? And I was like, yeah, send them instead of me. I don't need to go speak in front of 300 people again. Let someone else do it. I'll coach them and make sure they do the best job they possibly do it. But because all of us in our careers have that one person who kind of picked us out of the lineup and said, "I'm going to help you," and that person changes your life. And I had that happen to me, and I hope I can do that for somebody else.
What do you think that are usually the big mistakes of companies or leaders when they first want to approach diversity and inclusion in the workplace?
Well, you nailed it, Virginia. It's the numbers game, right? That's not the reason for it. I've got this many people LGBT plus. I have this many women. I have this many people of color. That's not it. You should be looking for when. I was at a company one time when they were really concerned with cultural fit. They wanted to hire someone who was a cultural fit. And when I looked at our hiring manager, I said, if we're concerned about our culture so much that one person is going to destroy it, who we bring in has a different attitude, didn't go to the same college, didn't have the same sort of background, we don't have a culture, we have a clique, right? So a lot of times I feel that when leadership boils it down to a numbers game, that really waters it down, and that really, I think that's where people get the negative attitude about DEI. It's like, oh, they got the position because they're a woman. They got the position because they're gay. They got the position because of this, and that's not necessarily true, right? But that can be the perception. So whenever I hire people, I try to make sure they're not a cultural fit. I look for people with different backgrounds.
It was really insightful. Thank you very much. I really enjoyed the conversation. I hope that you also enjoyed the time and discussing with us. Again, thank you for your time, for your openness, and everything that you do. I hope that this also resonates with other leaders and motivate them to take the necessary steps to actually create a more diverse and inclusive workplace, and maybe giving them the experience for people and help them to have a reason to go back to the office from time to time. And thanks everyone for watching. Don't miss out our next episode and keep following us at up42.com.
Thanks, Virginia.
Thank you.